think of the 1922 committee as a sort of trade union or pressure group for backbench Conservative MPs. And the reason they're so important is because they run the leadership election. So they're in charge of setting the rules, they're in charge of setting the thresholds for MPs who want to nominate themselves, and they're in charge of making sure it all runs fairly and smoothly.
Yeah, so then the Prime Minister's resigned and now we're in the process of a leadership election. What actually is that process? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, but next week we're potentially seeing a rejig of the rules to ensure that we don't end up with more candidates than goodness only knows what.
Well, it's rumoured that at some point in the future, every MP will be a Conservative Party leadership candidate. But what the 1922 committee is responsible for is to make sure that the system is as efficient as possible. And I mean, looking at the cost of living crisis, the war in Ukraine, it's so vital that we get a Prime Minister as soon as possible. So they set the rules at the start of each leadership election. There's no document that says this is what you have to do. So that there'll be a new election for a new 1922 committee very soon. They'll set the rules, and they will probably decide to make it much quicker than the last election that took place, partly because there are so many more candidates this time.
Yeah, because I don't know about you, but there is part of me that just thinks, come on, we've got to make this as quick as possible. But at the same time, I wish the Tory party would actually decide what it is for and what it's all about. And I feel like that conversation internally between the Tories is sorely lacking, because it strikes me they want to be sort of a moderate Labour or Green party.
Hey, so this is why leadership elections can be so useful for parties, but usually in opposition, because they can have these big debates about what the future of the party should look like. But what's really interesting is that we do have a wide range of views on offer across the spectrum of parliamentary thought within the Conservative Party. And so this should be a good chance for leadership candidates to set out what they believe. And yet, as we saw with the Johnson election, what you promise MPs is not necessarily what you deliver when you end up in office. So MPs are going to be especially cautious to make sure that actually they're not being sold a dud, or they're not just being told what they want to hear from prospective leadership candidates.
Yeah, so when do you reckon you can give us any indication whatsoever? I'm not going to ask you to get your crystal ball out and look into it and tell us who the next leader is going to be, but when can we at least expect... when can we actually expect a new Prime Minister? Because if we whittle it down quite quickly, surely then you can expedite the process fairly speedily, can't you?
Well, last time the leadership election took about 6 weeks. I think it was the 7th of June it started and it ended on the 22nd of July. So that's roughly 6 weeks. There will need to be some time for the final two candidates to go to the membership and to do husting events across the country. But I suspect if the 1922 committee want to, they can shorten it to about a month. That's probably the shortest realistic time to allow candidates to set their pitch out. It's probably quite important that the candidates who don't have any hope of winning step back, really, because it's taking the mix somewhat to drag this out when the country needs real leadership.